Thank you.
Well, thank you. Well, I want to welcome everybody and thank you for coming today on-site and off-site. I want to thank you guys for coming because, as I was getting ready to say, is that this is an area, the self-regulation, that is so near and dear to my heart. Walt was asking me earlier, he's like, how do you want to be introduced? And I said, well, go ahead and just say kind of my background, because really, I'm a detective. And so I get paid to be an occupational therapist, but really I'm a detective. And what we find is the curiosity for this area of self-regulation has grown and grown and grown for myself personally. And I think over the years that I've been doing occupational therapy, I've seen a shift in the type of children that are referred for therapy. I see a shift in the questions I'm receiving from teachers, from parents, from caretakers. And it's shifting from a lot more of the physical needs or motor needs of children to far more social emotional components. And I'm not referring to children with autism, because initially that was a lot of the questions regarding self-regulation were the children with autism. I think what we're seeing now is a marked shift in that, and we're seeing a lot more children who are struggling with transitions, sleep issues, peer relationships. It's a little scary when I receive a family's phone call and they're like, he's been kicked out of 3 preschools. And that's a real legitimate thing that is happening to a lot of our kids, and I'm sure as caregivers and preschool directors and teachers, you guys have had some of these children in your care where you're like, I just don't know what to do here. And what we're going to do today is, because this training is it's a short one, it's a 2-hour, we're going to do some very basic strategies that will get you started on trying to help these kids get regulated. We use the word dysregulated as occupational therapists, and you'll see, anybody who's ever known me knows that some of these slides that you're going to see, if you've heard me talk before, I'm always going to present a group of slides to you, no matter what I'm presenting, and it's about the brain, and it's about how does the brain develop. And if you have a little bit of that knowledge in your head, you can look at that child and go, you can still do the, wow, you are killing me. But you'll also know at the same time some of the strategies are coming from the neurological awareness of how kids develop. And it comes from the way that I think a lot of times as occupational therapists, we look at self-regulation differently. And what do we do to support these children? Okay? So I go back to, again, I'm a little detective. So every day we're busy watching these kids, trying to figure out what might be going on with this group of kids. As Walt said, I've been doing this for about 35 years now in a variety of settings. I would tell you that probably the most important job that I had was at a preschool, and it was at Child Development Centers of the Bluegrass here in Lexington. And it was then that I had the opportunity to really watch the makeup of kids in a classroom. Right now we do a lot of one-on-one at the office, but we're always sure to say we want to have a group. We want to pair kids together, because that's really when you see some of the behaviors that are occurring due to some of the self-regulation that children have. Okay? So we're going to get right started on this, and what I have up for you is just our objectives. And the way that I have the course set up is we're going to look at what exactly is self-regulation. And that's one of the most important things is we use that word, but I think we have to be very aware of what are the key components related to that. We're going to go into brain development. I'm going to spend a little bit of time breaking the brain down for you and showing you the areas that are important. Then we'll look at what research has found is some of the most common areas that we're now seeing. You may be surprised by those. And then I'm going to try to give you strategies to address the common areas and some of the neurological concepts that are behind what happens with self-regulation troubles. Okay? All right, so here's what we're going to talk about. What is self-regulation? The very first thing is that you have to control that mood. But the key part of that is the awareness. Okay? Here's what happens to a lot of the children that we see. Is for them, being dysregulated, being out of control, having some emotional issues, seems normal to them a lot of times. They're not aware that other people don't feel this way. If you constantly have the same feeling going on, that's what you're going to see. It's like, I didn't know anybody else felt differently. And we're going to talk about body temperature and how that is different for kids. We're going to talk about how do I increase that awareness of when I look at a child and I say, wow, you need to get, slow down, get some control, or we have the stop signs. Those are external supports for those kids, but I think we have to make them aware of the internal part of their own body so that they'll become aware of what it is exactly they're feeling when we're using those words with children. So the self-calming of control behavior, focus on a task, and do energy states. How can we manage those energy states? I think when we think of energy states, the first thing a lot of us think of is hyperactivity, right? With children, those are the easiest children to identify because they're running around, they're out of control, they may be throwing your blocks. But there's also a second group of kids who are the opposite. And these are the ones who I worry about the most because they slide under the radar. Because they're the ones you don't have to worry about, but they're this. And they don't get their coat right away. And they don't finish their meal right away. And they don't get outside and activate that body and play. Those are the ones that slide under the radar because your attention isn't being pulled to those group of kids. As an occupational therapist, we kind of say they're under-aroused, hypo-aroused may be a term that we'll use. Again, those are the ones that I think when we're talking about managing energy states, think of it that way. You have hyper and you have hypo. You have kids who are over-aroused and kids who are under-aroused. All right? Delayed gratification. How many times are we doing the, no, wait. Hold on. We're not ready yet. Slow down. Wait, no, we're not going out the door. And they just bolt on you. So self-regulation involves that. How can I delay my gratification? It's that famous research study of the marshmallows with the preschoolers where they offer marshmallows and they say, if you wait and you don't eat it, there's a bigger reward afterwards. And so research has shown that the kids who take the marshmallows are the children who are having the self-regulation issues later. It's a wonderful, wonderful study that's fairly recent, I believe. Tolerate changes in transitions and in activities. That is part of being able to self-regulate. How can I move from block play to free play? Block play maybe to circle time, to outside time. How do I get up in the morning from home, have my breakfast, go to the bathroom, brush my teeth? Those are all transitions. But I think what we forget is the number of transitions that happen in a day for these children. There are a lot. If you actually stop, and it was a mom the other day who said to me, her son happens to have autism, and she said, Julie, he has a schedule. And I'm showing his schedule to him. She goes, but I wanted him to realize that everybody has schedules, that we all have transitions. So she said, I started writing down, Mommy gets up, Mommy gets coffee, Mommy gets dressed. She goes, before I even got to 11 o'clock, I was so overwhelmed at all of the things that I did that I transitioned in and out of. I don't think we stop and think about how many transitions children have throughout a day. Some of our preschoolers are arriving at what time? 6 a.m. I hear, 7 o'clock, and how late do they stay?
6 p.m.
6 p.m., 5 p.m. Some children do half days. And the other thing we have to think about is for some settings, those transitions all happen in one room. The bathroom, the lunch, the nap, the play. And that's the reality of some of our environments that children are in. So as we won't have the opportunity today in this one to actually talk long-term about environments. That's an area that I think if we look at closely, we'll have a little bit of opportunity to talk about it. We can set up our environments to help these kids with self-regulation. You do really have to think about the noises that are happening in these classrooms for some of our kids who are hyper-responsive to external stimuli. That could be contributing to self-regulation difficulties. That's something that we call sensory processing disorder. And again, unfortunately, we're not going to have time today to really dive into that kind of a concept, but we're going to give you the basics on this. So the thing that we want to do, if we've got our next slide here, is self-regulation involves controlling your impulses, It's both to stop doing something when needed and to start doing something when needed. And when I think of that, that's immediately what I think about of transitions. Can I start and stop? Can I go from, let's say, active play on the playground? So we're doing something and then we say, stop. We're now going to come in, line up, and we're going to go to circle time. So we have to stop and we have to move. So you're changing states, you're changing your awareness and your ability to regulate that. Active play to quiet play. We're going to talk a little bit about when you're first born that you'll see dysregulation immediately, and that's going to give you some clues of what might be happening with these children. And there's some key questions you'll ask yourself, okay? Self-regulation involves controlling your impulses to think ahead of your consequences to those actions. This is one of my favorite areas, because what we do a lot of times is when a behavior happens, and let's say someone hits someone bites someone, our first instinct is to do what? First of all, of course, help the child who's been, safety issues. But then if you've got that child and he's the little one that's running around your classroom and running around your classroom, your first instinct also is to immediately grab them and do some corrective actions, like consequences, behavioral charts. What we're going to talk about today is still doing some of those techniques, but we're going to do it differently, okay? Because what we're saying is we want them to think ahead. And what I'm going to talk to you about is the concept of you feel before you think. So what we're doing to a lot of children is we're putting them into a spiral when behaviors are happening, because we're not stopping a minute to think about, how do I now present what has occurred in a behavioral situation? Let's again pick hitting. Someone hits someone, we're going to present a strategy the next day, and we're going to talk about this as we move into some of the strategies, because our instinct is immediately to do timeouts, take a break from this activity, switch them out of an activity, and maybe move them into something different. And that'll make more sense as we get into strategies for you. But this thinking ahead is a high executive function for children. And if they could do it, they would be doing it. And that's always my point. We want them to choose a new action that would be more appropriate from using maybe a response of fighting or hitting or screaming. So we're having them make choices. And all of these self-regulation of what this is essentially, guys, executive functions. We're talking about higher level thinking skills for children. If you know the way the brain develops, and we're going to again talk about this a little bit, parts of those brain are still immature. And you have children who are being born who have regulation difficulties from the get-go. And we're going to talk about those key areas so that you can ask those questions of parents, and you'll say, this is one of my little people. This is the one who from early on was showing some state regulation difficulties. And when I say state regulation difficulties, I mean self-regulation, but it's an internal state. Okay? All right. Now, this slide, this is the one when I first started talking. I said, if you've ever heard Miss Julie speak, I'm always going to include this. This is going to get broken down into smaller segments for you. But the reason I want to show the slide in this type of a setup is because I want you to really realize that self-regulation has order to it. Okay? It develops sequentially. So you have, when you're first born, we have things that we call first order regulation. At about 18 months to 36 months, second order self-regulation skills start developing. Then you go to third order. I'm going to change this slide and I'm going to immediately put up the third order so you can see it in detail. And let's talk about exactly what is third order. So this slide is broken down. So if you can't read it, don't really worry right now, because as soon as I hit it, you're going to see each of these segments broken out. All right? So here's what I mean. Here's what we really, really need to think about is third order is where you're hoping that all those little children are when they arrive as packages at your school or your home or your daycare. You're like, here it comes. I hope everything's with the package. Okay? So let's look at what is in there. Intention. Okay? My intent. Think about, as I'm doing this, refer back to those things that we talked about of what is self-regulation. It's these things. I have to formulate plans. I have to have a goal. I have to execute strategies. We know these kids can't do that, right? They can't come up with the strategies to regulate their behavior, regulate their emotions. They have to have language for organization. So they do self-talk. A lot of the things you'll see when we get into the section about pretend play, when I say you use language for self-regulation, think about when children are on the playground. And I see this happen every day. And I've been talking to my parents of children who are homeschooled, who are so overly reliant on their parent for that ability to control my behavior, control my mood. You're on the playground. This happened the other day. I'm playing in the sandbox with a couple of the kids. We've got 2-year-olds running around. There's a 3-year-old classroom, and they're all out there. I suddenly see a little one run by, falls, scrapes her knee, right? She's crying. What ends up happening is one of the friends comes around and does what? Supports them. So you have peer-on-peer support, but he's using the language. He comes up and he's like, are you okay? Did you hurt yourself? Oh, I bet that hurt. Let's go find the teacher. So they interact back and forth, but they learn from each other during play how to regulate myself, how to rely on somebody else to give them the language of what happened. Did that make sense to you guys? So you see, and look at how much language is involved. And we're talking a lot of times about children, 2, 3, 4, and 5-year-olds, because this is geared towards young children, this presentation that we're doing today. So they don't have command of language, especially if you have some other issues possibly going on. So you use language to organize yourself. They recognize the need. Miss Julie, can I have a glass of water? Miss Julie, can I take a break? Miss Julie, I'm hot. So they recognize it. Do you remember my first slide that said that's the first key thing is you have to be aware of your own self-regulatory system. So asking for water, asking for a break. A lot of our children don't know to do that. So we have to be the ones who are providing that language for them and those supports. Okay? Organizing spaces, time, task, and environments. What does that go back to from our first slide? Transitions. I know we're going to go to recess after we do block play, but how many kids can't remember that? And we're using sequential charts, or we're using visuals, and we're doing a lot of, no, wait, not yet. First this, then that. But if you're self-regulated, you can move through this without any assistance. And hopefully you have a group of kids who are doing that. They get into the routine. It becomes predictable. They can say, I'm hot. I need a break. I need to go to the bathroom. Can I make my choice over here? Those are your self-regulated kids. So they have well-developed third-order regulatory abilities. Okay? This is what we're shooting for with a lot of our children. All right? I see some head nods, so that's good. Okay. So let's look what comes before that third order. It's what we call second order. As an occupational therapist, if you look down and you see the oral, the hands, and the body parts, this is what I use a lot in treatment. It's what I use a lot with my families. It's what I talk to my preschool teachers about. The way you have to think about this, and I'll say this little line slowly. When you have children who are having difficulty with third order self-regulation skills, okay, what I just showed you, what'll happen is children will recruit or they will use second order strategies. Okay? If they can't figure out to use second order strategies, we as caretakers, we as teachers, we as therapists will start showing them how to use these strategies. So let's do an example of second order strategies. It is the little boy who's at circle time who is chewing on his shirt. He's the little boy at circle time who is sucking his thumb. He's the little person who might be rocking back and forth at circle. So what you're seeing is a lot of use of movement to maintain my arousal at an appropriate level. So if we're looking at the third one here where it says body parts, use of movement patterns, pushing, pulling, lifting, carrying, all of those. Children do that at different levels. Some do it too fast, too hard. Some children don't do it all. And remember when I was talking about the children who are under the radar, those ones who are really, really slow? What is happening is, let's say you take one of those under-aroused children, and that's a self-regulatory problem, that my alert level, it doesn't match where it needs to be. So I have to be alert, I have to be attentive at circle time, but I'm one of these children. The lower arousal, low muscle tone, we talk about it. If that's a child who figures out that they need to use a strategy to stay alert, they're going to be your wiggler. They're going to be the one that says, this isn't functional. I can't listen to my teacher. I can't do anything. I can't lay down. So I have to do something. I have to move. So do you see what they're doing is, in order to sustain their attention, stay in that third order, they have to do a strategy, and it's a second order strategy. Children start doing this at 18 months. What do they start doing? They push chairs, they carry things, they lift things. That organizes their body, is what second order strategies do. They organize children. You suck on your thumb, you play with something with your hand, you do little fidget toys. We're going to talk a lot about that as this moves on, of what are the things that you might want to have available in your classroom, your home, the back of your car. I tell my parents to have things ready for the children when they come home from school that can immediately help those children get organized. Okay? So let me look again and see what we have. They're going to use them to change their state. They're going to do adaptive movements. Hands is one of the key things. Fine motor skills, fidget toys. And I rarely use fidget toys. What I do instead is, because to me fidget toys don't have purpose. I shouldn't say that. They do have purpose. They don't have an extended use that creates sequencing, bilateral hand skills, purposeful play is probably what I want to say more than anything. You want to build up a group of items in your classroom that does purposeful play, so that the fidgets and things that I think a lot of times people recommend for these group of kids probably get misused or advocated quickly, when really it's, let's see if we can get those correct toys within that classroom environment the kids will naturally go to and self-regulate on their own. Okay? That kind of makes sense to you guys as second order?
What kind of toys are you talking about?
We're going to,
Okay.
yeah, we've got some slides for that. Yeah, I'll show you. All right, your next slide says first order. The reason I like to put this up is, this is how homeostasis first starts. When you are born, when that baby first comes out, we're hoping that there's a nice, regulated what? Sleeping, eating, pooing, cooing. That's what we want. For a lot of our kids, the sleeping, eating, pooing, and cooing does not happen. There could be sleep issues, feeding issues, muscle tone issues, and we'll talk about what those muscle tone issues can be. But what you want to look at, and the way that I talk about this, is first order is what we call autonomic nervous system. Okay? That's part of your central nervous system. You are born with what you're born with. So when you first come out, we're hoping our body temperature is regulated, blood pressure and heart rate. Okay, and let's look at now, when I began this conversation, I said, I think what we're seeing now is a change in motor involvement with children to now more social emotional issues with children, ADD, inattentiveness, ADD hyperactivity. And so I was having this conversation last night, and you always get those questions as a therapist and a teacher, do you think we're over-identifying children? Isn't that always what we always say? How come we're seeing so much more of this? From being 35 years out, here's what I've seen the change be. Is when I initially was hired out of school, it was for children who had obvious neurological injuries, cerebral palsy, maybe closed head injuries, along those items where there's actually an insult to the nervous system. Prematurity. Okay, what we're doing now is we do such a wonderful job with medical management of children with prematurity. We have an increase in the survival rate of these group of children, but if you know medically what happens to children who are born premature, there's underdeveloped lungs. There can be visual issues with those children. There can be muscle tone issues with those children. When you get that Christmas present and they're 4 years old coming into your classroom, you don't know necessarily, is this the one who was born premature at 1 pound 4 ounces? You don't know if it's the child who was in foster care but had narcotics into the nervous system. So these are the things that we have to remember, but we're not getting that information necessarily. So there's going to be some key questions that you can ask families that'll tell you from the get-go, from the very start as an infant, did we have any early first-order regulatory difficulties? These are the things you want to know. Temperature, respiration, sleep-wake cycles, ingestion, digestion, elimination. A lot of our kids have what? Gastrointestinal issues, gluten issues, allergies, ear infections. All of this comes into play for children who have regulatory difficulties, behavioral issues. We see the behavior, but we don't know what might be causing this. Hence, that's me being the detective and asking key questions. So let me give you an example of a typical interview I will do with a family when they'll call in and I'm talking to the parent. They're telling me the behaviors that the teacher has concerns about. So my first thing is, okay, I'm going to ask you some odd questions, and it's not even related to behavior. I'll immediately say, how's the sleep patterns for your child? Well, he sleeps pretty good, Miss Julie. Okay. When you put him to bed, well, when you wake him up in the morning, what do the covers look like? Oh, they're all over the place. They're off. They're thrown sideways. So you're going to get a makeup of what does sleep look like for these group of kids. If you have children whose body temperature runs hot, they're going to be the ones that the parents say he's all over the bed. He doesn't want to wear the pajamas. Think of transitions. Remember we talked about he doesn't want to go to bed? Well, he doesn't want to go to bed because there could be issues related to getting my body to settle down. We're going to talk about some ways to kind of help those children. But you're going to ask about sleep patterns. If they say it's okay, you're going to go back even farther. Well, how was it as a baby? And I'll have parents go, oh, we were so colicky. Oh my gosh, they screamed all the time. Red flag, okay? So then I start talking about the temperature. And if I have a parent say, he seems to be sweaty a lot, he's always hot, I'd never really thought about it. Oh, he only likes his food a certain temperature. Red flag, okay? The next thing you're going to ask about is, are we a picky eater? Did you have trouble as an infant with the sucking? The suck, swallow, breathing patterns? Well, we did. We had a lot of issues with moving from the bottle onto the stages of the food. Where you have stage 1, stage 2 of the foods. The most important part, though, is the whole suck. And I don't know if you guys will see me offline. Let me get my doll. But here's why it's so important to ask these questions, especially about early suck, here's my little buddy. And we're going to talk a lot about having to offer support to these group of children and nurturance and tactile issues. So here's my little baby, and I have him, and we cuddle him up, right? And we give the bottle, and what do? This is that whole cycle of eating, sleeping, pooing, and cooing. We talk, we're in this close space, we change our language. Oh, do. They take the bottle, they fall asleep. But what if you have a baby, and you don't know this, remember, because they're 4 years old when they came in, but early on, from the get-go, when this mom, dad, whoever, tried to give the baby the bottle, there could have been reflux. There could have been difficulty with sucking. So the baby does what first for survival? They're going to pull away. They're going to turn their head. They're going to move a lot. Okay? When that happens, and again, unfortunately, we won't have time to go into all of this, the actual physical body of that child changes. That can lead into some of the issues you see with, we use these terms of kids, the bolter, the runner, the crasher. There's a body makeup that develops when you have a group of children early on who had early feeding difficulties. It also leads into those issues with potty training because they go from this nice flexed, calming, relaxing position to this is an alerting position. Okay, can they see me off site, Walt?
Yes.
How I'm okay.
Yes.
Because what you see then is you go from this nice up close early learning, and then as they develop, they come up and they're comfortable sitting with you, to immediately it's this posture. This is an upright alerting posture. We call it extension. But what will happen visually to those kids is they see everything. They're up and they're like this, right? They fall over toys. They're going to go get something over there. They never saw this in front of them. Have you guys seen kids do this? And they'll be running across the classroom, and you think they're headed to the right place, and then suddenly they fall, and you're like, no, you're supposed to go over there. They never saw that toy because you know why? They don't look down. They don't use those early developmental skills that allow you to look down. It's called flexion. So there are a whole group of kids who are up like this running around your classroom. Their arms are back a lot of times. Okay, you'll see this kind of a posture out of those kids. So we're going to talk a little bit later on about why I want beanbag chairs to help these dysregulated children. Why do I want you to have a beanbag chair in your classroom or your home? Why do I want you to have little hideaways? They're based on neurological reasons and first, second, and third order strategies, okay? So once you start realizing that's the craziness behind this, it makes a lot more sense when you can understand why this is happening and why we're recommending certain things for you. So I continue to ask these questions of all of my family. How's respiratory status, so i.e. colds, bronchitis, ear infections. We want to know all of those questions. And if I'm getting a lot of red flags, all that tells me is I definitely had a little one who from the get-go, okay, that's the key thing, from the get-go, probably was telling us I have a dysregulated central nervous system, okay? And I said, unfortunately, if you get these children when they're 4, you don't know any of that. Okay? I always say it's the Christmas present that comes and there's parts missing. And so our job is to go find those parts to say, all right, what's missing? I got a couple things here. Okay? And these are the key questions you can ask. All right? So remember, this is what we're hoping for when they arrive. We're not getting it. So they're going to go to these things. They're going to move. They're going to use their hands. They're going to fidget, they're going to talk, they're going to chew on things to support themselves to stay here. But from the beginning, I probably have had some issues here. Autonomic nervous system, okay? All right. I'll let you process that a minute. Because, oh no, the brain.